So let's go first into the experience of sensory desire. So kāmacchanda is the name of the fourth fetter, desire. So it refers to this visceral sensory experience of desire that when it's animated, it makes it appear that there are certain objects or certain experiences or certain people that appear very desirable, right? That appear something that we want to pursue. And there's a sense of like a vague sense of lack, of course, underneath this type of pleasure, this type of craving behavior. So it is based on a fundamental sense that something is fundamentally lacking, in us. And if we would get these things that are giving us pleasure or happiness, as it's also sometimes called in the human language, then that vague sense of lack would be fulfilled. We would feel complete. So it's like a search for completeness through craving for different forms of pleasure, basically, different forms of well-being, various forms of happiness or aesthetic pleasure. So it can take very refined forms, or it can just manifest in a very basic manner, like in the experience of human animal. But it is a kind of animal brain, functioning and activity. So this is actually the very strange part about it, that even the relationships that appear harmonious and functional at the human level, like prior to going through awakening process, realization process. So prior to that, even the relationships that may appear like very beautiful and great, and they work and they, I don't know, feel nourishing, and they feel that they bring beautiful things to our lives. They really are based on a kind of mutual match of needs. So that's what the egoic identity is, or the way it functions, that it is looking for a pleasure in relationship in this manner. So when we find someone, whether it's a friend or a partner or any kind of relationship, that there is a kind of matching of our needs in a way that the relationship works and maybe even generates growth in a certain sense at the human level. It enhances our well-being, offers us a kind of context to live our life and share experiences. It really is based on this fetter, this sensory desire, and the sense that, as long as the other person is fulfilling my hunger for validation, like my need for being seen, my need for being reflected, and I offer the same to them in a way that it works for us, it feels like it's a great relationship. So this is why the whole experience of relational life shifts so radically if you go through a genuine awakening process, because like all of this is kind of uprooted from the system, like this way of experiencing and seeing and feeling on a moment by moment basis, like being driven by this fetter, by this sensory desire in this manner. Because at the human level, as long as the sense of identity is still there and the self structure is intact, we live in this conventional reality. It appears like, yeah, we are human beings, we have desires, we have ambitions, we have dreams, and we kind of pursue them. And then there's also this experience of resisting reality, getting irritated when things don't go our way, like not wanting certain things to happen and being very like frustrated when they do happen, right? The aversion, the ill will, the anger, or just general like hostility, which actually is, even it doesn't necessarily appear like that when we are identified in that way, and these fetters are driving our behavior. It's very mechanical, this way of living. It is actually like a human animal being driven by this type of survival instincts that manifests through these fetters. So this kind of love, this kind of friendship, this kind of romance, this kind of happiness that is based on the fourth fetter, the sensory desire, it always comes together with the aversion, with the hostility, like with this hidden fear of annihilation, and kind of constant sense that you need to defend your territory, and like very strong hostility that is activated when your security, your sense of safety is being threatened somehow. So as long as that doesn't happen, in a relationship, and we get what we want, we get the validation, we get the mirroring, which keeps the sensory desire kind of satisfied, we think the relationship works, but oftentimes, right, they don't work all the time like that. Like maybe if you are really lucky, and I don't know if that's even the word for it, but let's call it like that. If you're really lucky, you find a relationship that is very pleasurable and makes you happy like that there is very little friction. And if there's friction, it's easy to work it out in the relationship. So the activity of the fifth fetter is kind of minimal in the interaction. And it's mostly based on this type of like, hey, this works, like our needs are being met. This relationship makes me feel good, it makes me happy. I don't even know how those kind of relationships would feel like, because I had very little of them, like prior to the whole awakening process. Like my relationships were always kind of very challenging, and looking at it now in retrospect, I can see that was the greatest blessing from the perspective of awakening, that I was not given that type of happy relationship where you are just going into the dream, kind of like hypnotized by that apparent happiness and pleasure, that yeah, this is it. Like I was so disillusioned through my experience of relationships again and again. You could say the experience of suffering, if that's even the word for it. It doesn't appear like suffering now when I look at it, but yeah, that's what it was. It was forcing me to, to look for reality, what it actually is. And there were the disillusionment with relationships was one of the most powerful factors in my awakening process. Yeah, I guess you could call that suffering. It definitely felt like suffering at that time. But I can really see now, interestingly, that it was kind of that kind of karma in this, that just forced the system constantly to repeat certain kind of experiences that were dysfunctional and caused like great pain and even illness. Like I was like physically like in so much pain like most part of my life due to this type of like dysfunctional relationship patterns or abusive relationship patterns, mostly in romantic relationships. So it's just forced the system into a state of a kind of emergency where it wasn't anymore possible to live like that. Like it wasn't some sort of rational decision or anything that the conscious self could decide, because there was never any conscious self there to begin with. Like that way of being, it's like a kind of like a collective machinery, and it's driven by these fetters, and it's just, yeah, it's a kind of hallucination. It's like you're in this mild fever, and the fever is this light agitation, irritation, frustration, craving, you know, and you're just hallucinating. So that's the so-called human experience, from the perspective I'm looking at it now. And it needed to reach a certain point of emergency so that the awakening process could start. And that actually then feels like the system is going in full-on fever. Like if it was before just a mild fever and just some kind of habitual hallucination that appeared like the normal life, that thing was kind of like blown up into a phenomenal scale through the awakening process. Like you go through this purification and kind of karmic clearing that starts to happen. And the hallucinations, so to speak, like all these extraordinary awakening breakthroughs and experiences, and they're kind of like fireworks when this process takes place, but it kind of clears out the system from this illness of egoic identification, from these fetters. It clears the system from this being animated by these distortions, the desire and ill will. And it culminates in basic sanity, but it is a radical deconstruction. So the fundamental shift for me in this regard, was first of all that I was plunged into a thorough dark night for many, many, many years. Like when I reached this point of emergency and disillusionment with this way of functioning and living. It was catalyzed by a relationship breakup, the dark night, and was just extremely painful because I couldn't anymore avoid from feeling directly this energy in the system, what I'm describing here, the fourth and fifth fetter. Like I was kind of forced into the experience of the body. And whereas previously I had been able to use spirituality, spiritual lifestyle, spiritual practices, triggering various types of non-dual openings and experiences and mystical experiences, and as a way to avoid feeling this, as a way to, avoid facing that suffering, so to speak, in the direct experience. So all of that stopped working. And whereas previously I had been having these experiences and openings through Kundalini awakening, all of that stopped, like all of that ceased. And the system went into this mode of kind of like inner collapse, that started to happen. I mean, I didn't know it at the time or understand, of course, what was going on. Like for the egoic self or for the conscious self, it felt like annihilation. Like it felt like about to be destroyed. That was the constant sense about it during that dark night. That may sound a bit dramatic, but it pretty much was like that. It kind of felt like annihilation. And, there was also like a lot of silence and a lot of surrender about it. A lot of self-reflection, a lot of sincerity about like my previous way of living and what had been driving my behavior, this search for happiness and fulfillment through looking for completion from outside, looking for the ideal relationship, all of that stuff, being on the spiritual path, mainly in the form of spiritual materialism, without even understanding it. So I saw all of that, during that time. It was such a profound disillusionment. It felt like it had all been just like a major delusion, basically. And I couldn't really deny the reality of those non-dual openings. Like I knew that it was at the same time the more real and most important thing that had ever happened to me. But there was so much of these experiential byproducts and bliss that it released in the system for me initially that had taken all of my attention, and the system had become addicted to it, you know. And when those experiences finally ceased, I realized what it all had been, you know, that phase in my life that had followed the initial Kundalini awakening lasted about 3 years, kind of like intense ups and downs, intense surges of energy and openings, and like a lot of this type of sensory pleasure that appeared in a very elevated form, you know, in a very kind of divine form. Also relationships that seem to you know, interweave with these type of non-dual experiences and this type of like soulmate relationships, and they felt so good, right? And they felt like love, you know, all of that. It's a very seductive energy, Kundalini energy, and when it starts to amplify this sensory desire in our system, and if there's any childhood wounding left, which there definitely was for me, so the childhood wounding makes it so that we are kind of really craving for a kind of completion, for a parental relationship through merging, basically, and getting validation and approval. It doesn't appear like that when it's happening, like when it's unconscious, largely this type of shadow material that is driving the behavior. But that's what it was. It was this constant search for fulfillment and completion through relationships where these intense projections would happen, and Kundalini would amplify them, you know, and they are so pleasurable, like when the projection really matches, you know, when there's this mutual matching of projections or mutual matching of the egoic kind of matrices in this way that our psychic energy is suddenly activated, and like we don't access it generally. So it feels like the deepest parts of what you are suddenly emerging through this relationship, and you get to live it out, but you're actually just experiencing yourself in those relationships. So I said in the beginning of this video that the ill will and desire, so the fourth and fifth fetter, they kind of hijack our life force, they hijack our psychic force and distort it, and it makes it appear that our own, you could say, soul is manifested outside, you know, through relationships or through life experiences. It is not just in the relationships, but, you know, it can be a specific kind of lifestyle or a specific place in the world that you're really attached to, that is very much fulfilling your needs of happiness. But it's our own, you know, you could say, soul energy there. It's just appears that it's outside there in the form of an external reality, and then we crave for it. We crave for it. We crave for union with that energy, but we are actually kind of living in this loop. That's what this type of desire does, that it keeps us kind of hunting and pursuing constantly satisfaction in this type of way from objective reality, which is actually never objective. Like we are literally living in this world of projections, of karmic projections, and you know, pushing and pulling with these type of experiences and visions and activations through the relational life. Okay, so for me, what really broke it was this dark night, and what happened in the end of the dark night was something something that I can now understand, or I can now look into. But at the time when it was happening, it was nothing I would have ever been able to put in words. So in words, this may sound, I don't know, it's just concepts, I guess, but the actual experience of it, it's quite non-conceptual and indescribable. Like, it can be seen in retrospect for what it is, but when it's happening, it's yeah. So that's bodhicitta, what I'm talking about here. That's the birth of the mind of enlightenment. And what it does is that it starts to transform and transmute this energetic fabric, right? This visual, energetic, sensory desire fabric, reactivity fabric, hostility fabric, this kind of human animal brain, this survival thing. It starts to generate the mind of enlightenment out of that. So the sense of person is oftentimes there when it starts to happen. So for the apparent, character in the story, it may appear like an awakening, the fundamental, like, insight at the identity level. And it may appear as capacity to somehow tap into this type of force or power in us, this type of intention that is starting to orient us from within, that is something of completely alien for this consensus human paradigm, that is completely alien for this mechanical conditioned mind, this calculative mind of the egoic identity that is constantly, looking for what it can get and, what it wants, and has all these agendas, and, is driven by this hunger. And so this is like something of a completely different order that is being kind of starting to enter into the world through our system, through this process of awakening. That's what bodhicitta is. It starts to burn through these fetters, this type of conditioning in our system. It starts to burn through. It's this primordial mind that is utterly awake. It's uncalculated. It's so fresh, so immaculate, untainted. You feel it in your heart. You feel it in your heart when it starts to happen. This type of is like burning, but it's a very different type of burning than this feverish kind of samsaric existence that I was describing earlier. It's a different type of burning. It's like it initiates this process of transmutation and transformation. And then when these deeper shifts start to occur, dropping of the eighth fetter, which is the fundamental self structure or the fundamental identity structure at the energetic level that kind of holds this human identity together, the character, the ego. So when that is, demolished or seen through or dropped, I don't really understand what's even happening there. To me, it appears there's just a certain amount of karma that needs to run its course until it comes to this point that the system reaches an emergency, and it's just kind of almost like suffocated by this intensity of suffering, and it can't go on anymore. And then something is born out of that emergency, right? This experience of bodhicitta. And then the dream starts to fall apart, basically. So the karma is still running. So we start entering into the real awakening process, right? So it will intensify a lot of these karmic latent tendencies. It will intensify a lot of this type of stuff in our system. It really needs to come to the light. So that's the emptying out of the process. So we can't anymore hide from it. So So that's what's kind of happening after the initial awakening, that this kind of clearing starts to occur, and this type of transformation starts to occur already there. That the sensory desire and this existential hostility, something is starting to transform there. It's becoming more and more um, uh, there starts to be this experience of just confidence and clarity, and this just utter beingness, just this basic sense of goodness that starts to replace this old conditioned ways of perceiving. So it's kind of like a fundamental dignity starts to take place there, that we can start to feel increasingly more. It is kind of like the radiance of the sun is starting to pierce through this massive cloud of obscuration that's been suffocating the system, and it's there are these glimpses of clarity that often become increasingly tangible during this phase, and it will eventually then culminate to this fundamental collapse of the self structure. So after that, nothing anymore contains the experience. So after that, there is no character anymore, and it's clear that there never was. So now, whatever is left from the fourth and fifth fetter in our system is ill will and desire. It is sensory desire and reactivity. Now it's going to rush through our system kind of unhindered, and our energy body is fully open here. When this fundamental severance take place, like the severance of the root of the mind, the I sense. So yeah, it's a very powerful release, but it doesn't mean that the fourth and fifth fetter are simply gone here. They oftentimes are not, even if we have done work prior to this shift, kind of preparing the system. They are not just completely uprooted. I think it's almost impossible to completely uproot them prior to these deeper shifts, because only now the energy body is like fully open, and only now the experience is totally unfiltered and bare and just like pulsating and fluctuating and undifferentiated, and it's this raw energy of the ground that is just like everything just releases into that. And there can be a period of like deep immersion into total void, which can be so beautiful, and there can be a specific kind of innate sense of deep bliss and peace and total just extinction of reality into that like oceanic nothingness and vastness and kind of like unborn radiance, unmanifest ground of being. Like for me, there was like about a year, a period of like that, and almost no thoughts, uh, kind of like no mind, uh, like very beautiful. There was intensity also moving through the system, but mainly it was a kind of like a release into the absolute. That was, I guess you could call it like a honeymoon, especially the first few months. They were, well, very much like a honeymoon type of experience of this type of like heart opening and this like primordial just innocence and aliveness and just reality falling in love with itself. Actually, now when I'm looking at it, that innocence was still you know still kind of bound to these very subtle um, aspects of the psyche that had not yet been seen through, that were kind of fully coming into light now. So it just felt like this heart opening, and kind of like the innermost core was finally becoming totally visible. And it was like this self kind of experiencing itself as everything, something like that. It lasted a few months. So looking at it now, yeah, it was just projection. It was again another form of a very, very refined and elevated form of pleasure, actually, for Fetter, like almost like the most beautiful form of it, this awakening honeymoon. And then it went into this very void, like just kind of absolute, which was very different. But there was a kind of attachment to that as well. It was kind of like, deep sleep, but eyes open, but in a way that it was just a bit hard to function at the human level or conventional level. So it was that type of non-conceptual phase. And when that then ended, and it was kind of like something pulled the realization back into the humanness and into the body. There was a lot of attachment to kind of hold on to that phase where that had followed the release, and hold on to that sense of, oh my God, but it was so beautiful, that heart opening, and that innocence, and that pure bliss that was released. And it felt like a loss of that kind of clarity, because it also felt like total clarity. It felt like the human conditioning was totally wiped out. So when this re-entry to the psyche happened, to the embodied experience, it was a kind of shock to realize, and it was a kind of no mind state. So there wasn't really even self-consciousness there in a conventional manner, but it was a kind of shock to realize that there were still conditioning there to be cleared out, to be seen, to be inquired into, to be processed, to be yeah. I talk about this a lot, that the shadow work. So that's what it basically means. When we have these shifts, like initially it may feel like that this is awakening. It's just this instant clarity. It's just this instant recognition, this direct recognition, timeless, outside time, outside space. But without the real shadow work, you can't really embody non-dual realization in a moment to moment manner. And with non-dual realization, I mean this lived visceral experience of pure boundlessness and formlessness, unfettered, from this obscuration, from these distortions, from this pushing and pulling, from this animal brain activity, this survival and validation need to be special, all of that. So that needs to be cleared out. And for me, it was so physical, this process, like so energetic, visceral, and physical, that when I hear some people discuss non-duality and no self, that it's just some sort of insight, like at the level of awareness, like, or just some kind of non-event. And a little bit like I talk about in Neo-Advaita. They don't talk about no self there, but like I totally get it, what they are pointing out. I get it, that it's a way of transmitting the absolute. Well, it's not even a view. It's just a realization of the absolute, but it sounds so removed, from the relative experience to me, that I have no idea what these people are even talking about. Like, it's so different for me, this process, how it's been like characterized by this this energetic quality, of the self-liberation, self-release. So yeah, that's my experience, and I can only obviously talk about only my experience. So for me, there was a moment in this process then when the system was really clearing out the remnants of the fourth fetter, so the sensory desire, kāmacchanda. And it's so crazy. Like, guys, like, there's just no way to explain how reality appears when that is no more in the system. It feels like being an alien on a planet that is driven, by sensory desire, by craving, by survival instinct, just hidden in a very cultural, sophisticated clothing, in the human behavior. But you kind of see that it's like a machinery operating there, and you feel like sober, and you see what it was because you went through that. I mean, you know what it was, you know it in your body, and it's just like you feel clear. It's like, oh my God, I went through this crazy fever with hallucinations, and now the system is just clear, and it's not a spiritual thing. It's not anything that could be put in words. It's basic sanity. It's just, this pure mind of enlightenment, like unfettered by this fundamental delusion of self-grasping. So there is a very profound transformation that happens on this type of path that is sometimes called embodied liberation. So in Vajrayana, the goal is full Buddhahood in the body. So it requires a transformation of this type of, animal brain in our nervous system, in our somatics, in our cognitive structures, into something that's, Bodhicitta is the name for it in that tradition. But those are just concepts, and this is non-conceptual. This is beyond all descriptions. And Buddhism is famous for this kind of ideas that desire is an obscuration, exactly because what I was explaining here. But my experience is that when this fundamental unfettering takes place in this regard, our natural life force and vitality is finally allowed to express itself unhindered, like in a very natural manner, in a very ordinary manner, in a very innocent manner, but it's a kind of innocence that comes out of this death, like going through the fire, going through this radical clearing of the system. And there's a deep, deep well-being that is lived, moment by moment after having undergone this type of deconstruction and realization. And it continues, of course, the movement of realization. It's there's like endless refinement in regards to like subtle conditioning that is still lingering in the system, but this fundamental well-being, it's really like you could say pure desire. It's just this pure expression of desire or passion that is completely free of any kind of craving, any kind of wanting. So it's just desire in the form of breath, desire in the form of any experience that you could ever have, like even the undesirable ones or uncomfortable ones, they are also an expression of just this, deep well-being. Sometimes it's called spacious passion, this type of desire that is just not desire in any human sense, because it doesn't want anything. It's already full. So it has nothing to do with wanting to feel fulfilled, because that's completely gone. So feels like there is no desire. There's no desire anymore driving the system, but at the same time, everything is an expression of that pure desire or love. You could call it just love, but it's a completely different kind of love what human beings understand as love. This type of egoic need to get your needs met, and then you feel good, and that's love. or you get validated, and this constant need to feel special and get validation for that, and then when it happens, it feels like love. Yeah, it's kind of like shocking when it's seen for what it is. That survival instinct, that animal brain, and what it does, like how it interprets reality like that. And a lot of these spiritual experiences that happen on the path prior to the real awakening process starting, like prior to this emergency that I was talking about, it's just that decoration. It's just spiritual materialism. It's not love. Like even these mystical experiences of divine love, yeah, sometimes something of a different order may search through the system during those moments, but oftentimes that clarity is not attended, and the focus goes so much on the sensory pleasure that has taken this very elevated form as a visionary unraveling. So it's just another form of the same, just ego dressing itself, just in a spiritual disguise through this type of experiences. So that's not love. I mean, maybe it is love for human beings, but this is of a completely different order. What's emptiness really is, what shunyata really is, like what this heart opening is when you go through self-realization and the subsequent clearing that follows, which takes years, by the way. It's not just some magical event, and after that you just feel always good and never suffer anymore or something like that. That's just so childish to think about this process like that, in my opinion. Seriously. But it is pretty amazing, that there is this possibility of liberation. There is this possibility of going through this type of transformation. Okay, so this was my unfiltered, uncensored uh, talk about this subject. I have been feeling into it within the past weeks. It's been coming up in various conversations and dialogues, and it's been interwoven into my own practice. And it's just something that wanted to be voiced. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and this brought some um, perspective, right? So it's we can't do anything about this this type of power in us, which is the sensory desire. So you have to work with it. You have to work with it. Like you can't get rid of it. You can't manipulate it. You can't use spiritual techniques or non-dual strategies to kind of I don't know, rationalize your way out of it. It just doesn't work like that. This is a powerful force, and it's driving the whole wheel, the whole wheel of madness, so to speak. This is you have to respect this energy. That's um, that's my view upon it. But it is the very portal into this transformation. Oh yeah, in the end now, I think I still want to address the um, subject of sexuality in this regard, right? Because that does transform. So it's just impossible for it not to transform when you go through this type of process. Um, and that's of course different for each and everyone. How does that happen? But at least for me, I can share that when I had this experience of the Bodhicitta being born, and I entered this single-minded phase on the journey, this type of like warrior-like phase, kind of, you know, um, like all-consuming phase of the process. I lost interest in all forms of pleasure that I used to, feel attached to, like everything, like food or sleep or sex, things like that. So that was the end for me for desire for physical sex, to be quite honest. And I know it's not like that for everyone. And I know this is not desirable for most people to go through this kind of transformation. But for whatever it's worth, I can share that this happened, at least for me, like that it just ceased being interesting. And then with the later shifts, the no self shifts and the dropping of the eighth fetter, yeah, there was just no desire left anymore for that type of stuff. But that doesn't mean that there's no sexual energy. Actually, there can be a lot of sexual energy released in the awakening process, especially if it comes with Kundalini experiences. And those can then connect to these karmic visions, which is part of the Turgle practice. And eventually there will be the exhaustion of all visions. But I'm just saying this, that just because the sexual drive oftentimes drops away, or at least is decreased significantly for most people who go through no self-realization, it doesn't mean that there's no sexual energy. It just becomes like so much more, uh, I don't know, well, just very different, when there's no need to, when the ego is no more hijacking that energy in our system, right? And playing this game where we are looking for a completion through another person, and then the sexuality is kind of becomes this game of powerful projections of our own life force and psychic force into another person, and kind of a validation of our own sense of specialness, that we are so special. Like that's what people look for a lot in sexual relationships without realizing. That's why they get so much this type of sensory pleasure, like fourth feather type of pleasure out of sexuality, because it validates so strongly your sense of being separate and very unique and very special individual. So of course, when that is deconstructed, there's no more need for that kind of validation, because you see how mindless it is. That it's just the meaning making that has been cleared out from your system. So yeah, definitely the sexuality will transform in this process. It's a big part of the experience of this fetter, like kāmacchanda, the fourth fetter. So I just felt like sharing that also, since I don't know, I want to speak about these aspects of the realization process that are not so often discussed. So this is one of them. Okay, guys, I hope this was interesting for you, and I'll continue on this subject, of the fourth and fifth feathers. Um, so this was mostly about the fourth feather, but there's a lot more that could be said about the fifth feather, the aversion, and how it ties into the fourth feather, like how the fourth feather or this type of love is actually driven by fear, by survival fear and need for safety. So maybe I'll do another video about that. But yeah, this is it for now. Thanks for listening.